And that's why I think you see a lot of the emotional issues in sport that could be avoided if we just took the time to prioritize the realities. We're so into, well, you got to go to this trainer, you got to go to that trainer, you got to do that. And what that's doing, tying identity. And eventually what was once a little thread becomes a bundle that now it's part of their psyche. And it's unfortunate because it doesn't have to be that way. The kids who have gone the furthest and been the happiest are the ones whose parents are on the fence with their arms crossed. They hit a home run. It's neat to see that how if we take a step back, we often take 2 steps forward. It's when we force the kids to clinch that they end up hitting a wall.
Welcome to the Athletic Edge podcast. I'm your host, Liam Evans, strength and conditioning coach and owner of Evans Performance. This is a podcast tailored for athletes, coaches, and parents interested in every facet of athletic development. Join me and guests from around the world as we dive into game-changing tools and expert insights covering strength training, performance enhancement, and long-term athletic development strategies. Uncover the keys to elevate your athletic potential, drawing from trusted resources to safely and effectively navigate your training and build your athletic edge. Welcome back to the podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by strength coach Ray Zingler. Coach, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, me too. I couldn't agree more. Before we get into it, do you want to just give a quick background on yourself and your experience?
For sure. So I have a little bit of a different path than most. I grew up kind of learning from the Joe DeFrancos and Zach Evaneshes of the world, training down in my basement. And I grew up training under my dad, who eventually kind of reached out to our youth football program to offer some sort of a little bit of a training service to the youth demographic. And it was one of those that I fell in love with as a grade school kid, went up through high school, and we had this basement gym in our home. And at 18 years old, I decided I wanted to take a crack at this training thing. And I started doing it as a hobby in my childhood home. And here I am at 34, never having had another job. So I didn't have the traditional path of internships and things like that. And I'm not implying that that's the best route, but it was one of those I just kept my head down, and it worked out for me. So here I am today, less dumb than I was, 15 years ago, but still very passionate about working with youth athletes. And we also work with general populations, military populations, and et cetera. Just north of Atlanta, Georgia, in Marietta is where we're located.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, obviously you do youth athletes. Do you also do some general pop and others? Because your gym is at your house, right?
Well, so it's a great question. So my gym is actually, it's at a residence that I own, but there's a barn on the property. So we leased the home out, and then I live just about a mile away. So it was one of those in the private sector in an effort to kind of keep it different, very niche, and limit our overhead expenses. It's kind of a unique setup, and where we're at, it's not a rural area, but it's kind of off the beaten path a little bit, to where you kind of got to know where you're going to find it, and it creates a little bit of excitement for folks, looking for something different. But yes, we work with I started with youth athletes, and that's always kind of been our bread and butter, and then obviously to see them grow up and go college, sometimes professional ranks, and then it's everyday moms and dads that are getting in that may not be CrossFit for them. It may not just be going to the gym and getting on the treadmill. We call it, strength training for adults is the other side of our business as well.
So what does a typical day then look like for you as far as when you train in athletes, when you train in adults?
That's a great question. So we normally have, our adult programs going on during the early morning hours and sometimes the later evening hours. And then obviously working with students, the vast majority of their days during the school year, they're busy at school. So we really have kind of odd hours to where we're working really early in the morning and then kind of later into the afternoons and evenings. And then some of the coaches at my gym will utilize and leverage some of those, quote, dead hours during the day to work with, one-on-one or semi-private type groups. So it's again, I always tell folks that you're never going to have the optimal hours, because we have to work when others are available, and that oftentimes comes at some of those wee hours of the morning and sometimes later into the evenings. But it's one of those things you just accept with the territory.
You have other coaches working for you as well?
Yes. So typically what we do is what's very neat, my lead coach is the only coach at my gym who didn't grow up training under me or my father. A lot of the staff members that I have, which has been really cool, is to see them kind of grow up from middle school, high school, go to college, and then sometimes come back, whether that be in an internship role or an assistant coaching role. And what's neat about it is that it allows me to cut the learning curves, because a lot of these guys, they grew up training under me. We have an assistant coach now. His name's Javante Kruger. I started training him at, 13, 14 years old. 10 years later, he's come back, and it's like the learning curve for him in our gym has been so minimal because he knows the expectations. He knows the requirements. He knows how I operate, what I tolerate, what I dislike. So it's been neat to kind of see those full circle moments for him to come back and now give to others what I gave him, a decade ago.
Having employees, having other people working for you, I'm sure there's some, systemized approach to everything you're doing. And for the purpose of this podcast, obviously, we'll look more at the youth athletic development side.
Sure.
So what kind of, just a broad overview, like what is, the Zingler strength experience?
Love it, man. And I appreciate you saying experience, because that's how I sell, our product, is that, hey, anywhere you can go and you can do sets and reps, and you can, if you wanted to, you can Google now with AI, you can type in youth athlete workout program and you'll get a general, halfway decent program, especially knowing that, youth athletes can benefit from very little as far as the rigidity and the structure. But, it's one of those that I will say the majority of the kids we're training, they do play sports, but I have kind of a differentiated approach where, at least here in the States, there's this idea that we need to sell out on specificity, and they need to be playing year round and jump on these teams 12 months a year and focus on the specific side of training. So I don't necessarily want to say that I'm the regression guy. I've seen that there's definitely been a lack of general physical preparation for a specialized youth athlete. And as you're probably well aware, the height of our ceiling as an athlete, it hinges on the quality of our foundation. So, people always, do you do sports specific? Do you do this? And I just very blatantly say, no, we don't. And then I turn the question around on them. If, Timmy is playing soccer 12 months a year with 4 practices a week, 2 or 3 games every single weekend, is he really going to benefit from more of what I argue he's already doing too much of? Meanwhile, he can't tie his shoes well, and he doesn't know how to skip or hop, and we think it's another, soccer session. So I let them know that we're obviously more of the generalized approach. We're trying to kind of widen their base. And then we also take a tremendous amount of pride in the mentorship side of this, and we try to humanize all of the students we're working with. It's not Noah, the soccer player. It's Noah who happens to play soccer, and we humanize them, and we talk to them about just the general life stuff to really get into their psyche and their mentals, to teach them and show them that their identity doesn't lie in the sport they play. It's their character and behavior beyond their sport, because as you know, despite wearing your Olympics hat, a lot of these guys, they're not going to make a living playing sport. So it's what can we provide for them during their time with us that they can take with them into the real world and benefit from it. I always joke that I would rather see one of my athletes as a 16-year-old, never get paid $1 to play a sport, but at 40 years old, he's going to the fitness center to train 2 or 3 times a week because he positively associated with it in our doors, than sit here and sell out on the most ideal training modality that doesn't exist, all for hopes of making it big, so it's definitely a grounded approach that, we want to see our kids reach the pinnacle of their potential. But at the same time, as a data analytics guy, I know where this ends. Now I need to make sure that in my approach, we're giving kids things that are going to travel beyond, when the jersey inevitably is going to come off.
And I think that's when it gets almost dangerous with kids, is when we see them or coaches see them as just the athlete or just the sport they're in, and their identity, like you said, gets tied up in that. And I've seen, myself included, I've seen so many athletes, if your identity is I'm a footballer, a swimmer, a soccer, whatever it is, and you start to have a few bad games, a few bad whatever, like it feels like your whole life is
for sure.
suffering when really it's just that small part of it.
Absolutely. And it was like we were talking a little bit off air about some of the Olympic side of things. And I see this at from rec sport all the way to literally the pinnacle. And I'm very, very intentional about, again, just as an example with this soccer player I was telling you about. I said, if it doesn't go your way, what happens? I'll be upset. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I always say, then what? Then what? Then what? And it's like, you still have a family that loves you. You still have your friends. You still have these things that are important to you. So like the absolute worst that could come of this is you're very temporarily frustrated. You don't lose years of your life. You don't have some so it's trying to ground them in a sense. And the same is true for the 13-year-old baseball player who might feel like if he doesn't make the A team, he's a failure of a human. So it's been really cool to have the full range of folks, and it's still, a big pillar on my whiteboard is people first, athletes second, and humanizing them. And you find, and you could probably attest to this, even at the top of they don't want to talk about training and sport, all that. They talk to them as people, and you'll end up getting a lot further with folks, making it about themselves than sitting here speaking to them robotically, about the biomechanical analysis of the lunge pattern and why we need to focus on the knee angle. No, like I talked to you about your life and like, what are you having for dinner? It's like that little simple stuff we get away from. And then we wonder, why these kids might play a sport their entire life, go to college and play at a high level. And then all of a sudden it comes to an end. And then who am I? They don't know anything else. And it's a very real problem that starts very early. And I try to nip that, not because I'm a downer and don't want to see them reach it, but again, even at the highest level, it's going to come to an end one day. And, I think understanding who these people are beyond their sport is probably the most important thing, because I see it all the time. People that come out and it's like they finish playing their college sport and they think, oh, well, all I know is football, so naturally I'm going to be a football trainer. And they're trying to hang on and hang on and hang on. And eventually, sometimes I've seen it, years of their lives are, I don't want to say wasted, but they're struggling because all they thought they had to be who they were from an outsider's perspective versus being comfortable within their own skin. Because again, every coach, sometimes even their parents inadvertently are pushing. We're not robots, we're real people. And that's why I think you see a lot of the emotional issues in sport that could be avoided if we just took the time to prioritize the realities. We're so into, well, you got to go to this trainer, you got to go to that trainer, you got to do that. And what that's doing, tying identity. And eventually what was once a little thread becomes a bundle that now it's part of their psyche. And it's unfortunate because it doesn't have to be that way. And, I've seen, again, in my time, the kids who have gone the furthest and been the happiest are the ones whose parents are on the fence with their arms crossed. They hit a home run, they strike out. There's no difference. It's the dad that's, leaning on the fence. That's the one that really, really screws them up. And it's neat to see that how if we take a step back, we often take two steps forward. It's when we force the kids to clinch that they end up hitting a wall.
Yeah, couldn't agree. And it's, as coaches, it's our job to prepare the kids, but that, like you said, there's a duality to that. Obviously, for those that are really high performance athletes and may go on to play in college or past that, obviously we want to prepare them for that.
Sure.
But there's also the preparations that come for, like you said, I want them to be 30, 40 years old,
right?
Have a good relationship with working out, with the gym, all the benefits that come with that, and still doing it.
Absolutely. And even if they do go pro, they're going to be pro people for infinitely longer than they were playing, sports. If you think about it, let's say you make it to 30, right? And you start at 12, we're talking what, 18 years? Now you're going to go from 30 to 80, or guess what? You don't have that forced accountability stimulus where you got to be at practice, you got to be at workouts, you got to be at treatment. It's up to you now. And again, in your youth, you can get away with anything. How many professional athletes have you seen go from looking like they were, etched out of stone to now they have all this money, they have all this time, they're eating garbage food, and now that one elite NFL player who looked like, again, ripped to the bone. Now he's pre-diabetic before he's 42 years old because he's been eating lobster and not moving his body. That's no good either. And that's a drastic example. But again, look at the average, especially here in America, look at the average American at 45 years old. We're riddled with disease and all these things that are preventable if they learned how to prioritize health and fitness. So that's kind of my wide kind of angled goal. And then to your point, preparing them for where they're at today. How can I make that physical preparation today kind of extend outwardly as they get older? They need to be doing extensive and intensive plyos when they're 45 years old? No. But can they train their hamstrings and walk on the elliptical? That's kind of the message I try to bake in to them.
For sure. And you already touched on it a few minutes ago, and it's one of the things I wanted to dive into.
Sure.
But it is the whole, sports specialization, and I want this sports specific training because I play baseball, I play this, I play that.
Right.
What is your kind of response to either, whether it's the kid or the parents, when they come to you with those sorts of things? Because I did in my research, something that I saw that you said that I really, really liked was general capacity funds special potential.
Sure. Yeah, it's challenging. When I was younger and arguably more arrogant, I would sit here and I'd spit statistics at people, and this isn't how it works. You don't know what you're talking. And I was an idiot, because even though I was right, it wasn't making a difference, right? It's not necessarily about what you or I know to be true. It's about what the consumer perceives. Mm-hmm. So the way that I've kind of adopted my approach a little bit, or adapted, excuse me, is listen. They want the sport specific. They like the ladder drills because the ladder drills feel like agility to them, and the agility is the change of direction. So I can sit here all day long and say ladder drills suck. It's a closed drill and an open sporting event, and I can sit here and be right? But what does being right do at the expense of making a difference? So what I've tried to do is share the understanding from the consumer's perspective. And absolutely, I don't want to sit here and say that sports specifics don't have their place. At the end of the day, the number one metric in what you and I do is on-field or in-realm performance. So again, that is important, and you do need to acquire these skills. But at the same time, to the quote that you just mentioned, I try to get these folks to understand that what we're trying to do in this generalized environment is increase their horsepower. So I always use the car analogy. And what I mean by the car analogy is, hey, if we've got a basic car and we want to enhance that car's outputs, we have to do some work on the motor. We can put the nicest paint job, the best looking rims, the stereo system, all of that, and we can change the appearance or the facade of it. But in order to improve the output potential of that vehicle, we have to increase the motor's capacity. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with our generalized training. So I explained to them, listen, I don't really care how much Timmy can vertical jump. His squat max doesn't impress me. So I speak the same language as these folks. What I'm trying to do is increase his relative strength. When I increase his relative strength, I increase his ability to produce force. When I increase his ability to produce force, now when we take these newly found athletic competencies out into the specific environment, we enhance what they're able to do out there. So I say, hey, stick with the practices. If you need to see your hitting instructor, I'm not saying don't do any of this, but again, we're going to hit a point of diminishing return if all we're doing is trying to change the paint color. All we're doing is trying to upgrade the seats in the vehicle. We have to go back to the basics. And again, some people will take the time to be educated. Other people won't, because they saw that, hey, what worked for this other kid over here, I must do the same thing. And then again, my argument that sometimes doesn't work is it's always a software and a hardware issue, right? Some people, they're going to have better ingrained hardware from a genetic perspective. Again, the Olympian girl that I'm talking about, I tell her you could train in a Dunkin' Donuts restaurant and still be who you are. Now, if somebody else takes that same approach with a different subset of hardware, now we're going to have dramatically different results. So it's the thing that I say is, if you have to question whether or not you're elite, you probably need a bit more of the reduced or remedial training. And it's a challenge that I've tried to evolve my communication style, because you sit here and tell people you're wrong, that doesn't do anything. It's more or less learning how to level with them and speak their language, so that way you earn the ability to impact them.
Yeah, exactly. I think half of our job turns into being able to obviously communicate with the athletes, but also with sport coaches or their parents or anybody else.
100%. And here's the deal, man. You and I are always going to, at least here in America, I'm looked at as the general PE teacher who just wants your money. People think that, oh, it's a business, he's just selling the training, and what do squats have to do with soccer? And all these, and I understand that. So again, it's about kind of learning how to communicate and speak the language, because as much as you and I know about, the science of performance and understanding what's actually important and why these things are important, think about it. I always try to wear the hat of a 45-year-old mother with 3 kids. She's got to drop one off at dance. She's got to take the other one to soccer. She has her appointment. She's got her job, dry clean. There's so many things. And now I'm going to talk to her about, the stretch shortening cycle of plyometric. She doesn't know what or care what any of that means. Sally plays soccer. We're doing more soccer training. If it looks like soccer, smells like soccer, we need more soccer. So it's, again, trying to speak that language. And another analogy I use is like the mile run. If you've never run a mile in your life and you go out and you build up to a mile, and then you train that mile every single day for the first 6 weeks, you can incrementally improve your mile time. But if you sit there and you run that same mile, and that's the only training that you do for the next 2 years, it's not necessarily going to be, quote, bad for you, but we're going to hit a point of diminishing return, right? Because our body is adapted to the stimulus. Well, when you send your kid to showcase after showcase after showcase, and we're not doing anything to enhance our, quote, showcasing abilities, you're essentially just showcasing the same thing over and over and over. It's my job to help kind of raise that floor so that your son or daughter's ceiling can raise. I don't care if they impress me in the weight room. If we can increase qualities in the weight room that help improve their showcase, that's where I don't need any credit. I'm not trying to be the knight in shining armor that's saving the day. It's, again, trying to educate folks on what they don't necessarily know. And it's gray, because strength and conditioning, it's still new. You have dads that, well, back in my day, we do, and like I get it. But again, my truck needs, work under the hood. I know that it needs I don't necessarily know which nut and bolt to turn, so I can pretend like I know, or I can take it to the specialist who knows more than I do. Sometimes it's an inadvertent ego issue. Sometimes these parents and these coaches, they have good ideas and good intentions. It's easy to call them idiots and they're dumb. And I never like to speak poorly of anybody, but sometimes, as you know, about confirmation bias, and, I've been doing this 20 years and this is the way that we've done it, unless you're very self-aware, you don't recognize your blind spots. And, that's something that I've even had to come to terms with. Again, not because maybe I was wrong, but it's like seeing it from their perspective. I'm thinking, you go to so much baseball. What you don't need more? What? But again, mentally, they might need more, because that's what they feel. Okay, so let's find a way to, enhance what they're doing without coming to them from an all or none, take it all away, it's bullshit perspective.
I think the more coaches get into it, you realize just the psychology of it all.
It's everything.
How can we get them to do what we want to do, but make them or their parents, also happy with what they're doing?
You just described my entire job, and likely your job too. That's exactly what it is. It's basically just, finding that balance of, what makes sense to all involved.
I don't know if I'm sure you have gotten questions like this, but I don't know what it's been about the last few months. I've gotten quite a few of a parent of maybe a 9, 10, 11-year-old
Right.
that's come looking for training, which is great, but their main focus is my kid doesn't run, correctly.
Right.
How can you help with this?
Right.
Have you had those types of questions?
All of them. Yeah. And it's so funny. And I use the giraffe example here, where, again, these kids, their bodies are changing, adapting, evolving. There's so many different things going on. And I always try to look, beyond the surface of it, because I could very quickly say, shut up, Susan, your son's 9, like his body's going to grow and he'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
But again, what's happening is Susan is at soccer practice. She sees another 9-year-old who's running relatively well because his gait cycle, is a little bit better from a genetic advancement standpoint, where her son might be, an early developer, and at 9, 10, none of them have really developed. Anyway, so it's again trying to help them understand that we got to get away from the comparison game, because and they might say, oh, I don't care about it or anything like that, I just want to help him. But naturally, they're comparing. The only reason they feel like their son or daughter isn't able to run well is because they saw somebody else's son or daughter running better than they were, right? So now, without knowing it, they're comparing their kid to the other kid. So it's more or less just, again, trying to etch them along and help them to understand that, yes, there are drills that we're going to do that are obviously going to help their running form. I like to do things with like sleds and things where they're pushing a light prowler, and I can teach shin angles and this. But a lot of it, as you know, in performance, they're going to revert back to what they do naturally. So there's only so much imprinting that you can do that, again, just from an honesty perspective, it's just sharing with them that, unfortunately, and it's not even unfortunate, it takes time, where you'll have the other guy down the road who will promise that he's going to fix the running form with, elbow drills and wall drives and things like that, which, again, those things can help, but it's like a lot of it, the best training for young athletes is their own personal human growth and development. It's so funny. People think that I'm some like wizard because at 14, their kid magically got stronger and he's running faster, and Ray's training is the best. And like, I do want to obviously say that we did things to positively influence that, but the majority of it is going to come hormonally as their bodies start to fuse testosterone into the system and things like that. So it's more or less of, hey, there's some things that we can do, but at the same time, we can't outrun physiology. So what I focus on, as much as the running technique and this and that, which again, I hear every single week, it's not necessarily like coaching them audibly, because there's only so much bandwidth they have to understand that. It's, number one, creating drills or environments where they don't have to think about it. From an example, we'll do a bunch of like kneeling sprint starts where their shin angles are, set up a little bit better than just upright running. Or we'll have like a wicket cone to where I'll have them project their first step to really feel those positions. But what I'm really focused on with those younger students is just teaching them how to give effort. In the modern era, and this is kind of getting off track, and I'll reel this back in, but it's like they don't do a lot of unstructured pickup play. They everything they do is robotic and structured. And so what I'm more focused on is teaching them how to work hard, and their genes will catch up eventually if we can learn how to do things the right way and do them at a not even an intense level, but an effort-based level. We'll end up getting a lot further when they are 12, 13 years old. It's one of the coolest things in my life is seeing that 9-year-old that can't even walk properly, much less run. And then all of a sudden, teaching him foundational goblet squats and how to hinge his hips and these just general strength of a reverse lunge. And then now all of a sudden, it's an overnight success that he's all of a sudden starting to run well, when in reality it was, the foundational training components ran into genetics, and then it showcases itself. So it's, again, speaking to the parents on a humanized level, helping them to understand that, again, there's only so much that we can do, because if we sit here, and this, and I do one-on-one training 3 times a week with a 10-year-old, and I'm so focused on turnover and gait cycle and all, that kid wants to be playing Xbox anyway. Now I've just flooded his brain with sensory overload that he can't even, now I don't even want to play sports. You know what I mean? So again, it's getting them into those raw environments to where they can learn how to work hard and have fun. One thing that we do in the gym all the time, and people might think, oh, you're having people pay to play. We have pickup games, and they're playing spike ball and 3-on-3 soccer and just running around and moving their body. Movement diversity, I think, has a lot to do with some of the running issues. It's like they play these specific sports and they're only performing these specific movement patterns, but they're not running around and changing direction and doing these different things. My son is 5 years old, and he's by no means the perfect. He's five, but what I try to do to him is expose him to a variety of different movement patterns, and I coach my son very, very little because I know that what I say now doesn't have much. It's not going to really pay dividends as he changes. But again, and I see this with a lot of young kids that have this movement diversity, is like my son, when he's trying his hardest, he runs relatively well, and he's squeezing his palms and he's fighting, but again, it doesn't look that bad, so I think a lot of people have less movement problems and they have more psychological expectations of what they think it should be that is kind of skewing their perceptions a little bit. So I don't want to say that kids don't have problems that they can correct, but I think a lot of times we create these problems from a training environment so we can try to sell people the solution when, in my opinion, a lot of it is bullshit.
Yeah. A lot of times my answer to those parents is like you said, I'm very respectful and I just try in the, best way possible to be like, yeah, for sure we can help with this.
Right.
Here's how we're going to handle it,
Sure.
With him, he's, probably has zero strength,
right,
probably has zero movement capacity, this,
right,
that, and the other. We're just going to get him started.
Right.
And, as he grows, magically things happen.
100%. And that's, you just hit on it, man. And it's so hard because, again, I understand the value of getting kids stronger. And now I mean relatively stronger. But again, a parent of a 13-year-old hears strength training. Now their mind immediately goes to 1970 stunted growth, blah, blah, blah. It does truly come down to the strength. In order to move well, you have to have strong enough tissues to be able to control your body and project yourself, so it's trying to teach them the value of strength training initially. Does an Olympic sprinter need to prioritize back squats over sprinting? Absolutely not. But a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old, again, I'm not trying to go viral on Instagram with a 10-year-old squatting 300 pounds, but it's magical what happens when you stick a 15-pound kettlebell in their hand and they can perform 50 reps of a full range of motion goblet squats. Well, that doesn't look like sprinting. It's strengthening the ankles, the knees, the calves, the hamstrings, the hips. And now when we start to run, when we have that relative strength to take ownership of our movement, are they going to get better at running overnight? No. But at the same time, over time, as we're building these capacities and strength levels, things start to look a lot better, which is why I will always, forever, I will sell the importance of strength. I try to tell folks that, hey, at the end of the day, my goal isn't to get people squatting the most weight, because if the world's best squatters were the fastest sprinters, that would be the case. But what it is the bunch of 300-pound guys that have to sleep with CPAP machines. Obviously, there's a point of diminishing return, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, like, because strength isn't the be all end all, that it's not critically important in the beginning. And I see it literally every day of my life that when we get kids stronger, and I don't mean 10 or 20 or 50, I've trained thousands of kids, and as their relative strength has gone up, all of their capacities have gone up. So I have too much information to, like, let me try to trick them into buying speed and agility because that sounds better. What I've learned to do and adapt and evolve is to learn how to speak that speed and agility language, because that's what makes sense to the consumer. But then add what really matters. If I were to get a kid and just bring him over there and do lateral drills and cone hops and this and that, again, that makes the parents feel good. But why isn't that producing the results that they're after? So I've got to balance that line of, okay, I want to be ethically sound and not sell them garbage, but I also want to be able to speak the language that they can resonate with. So it's a balancing act that I've learned to get better at over the years, because if you asked me 10 years ago, I'm talking to you all about how strength is important, and well, I don't want strength. I want to be better at soccer. You have to get into those, realms where you can talk on the same level.
100%. And I'm the same way. My first step with an athlete, if obviously training age of 0,
Right.
First step is always, how do they move, and then let's try and start to get some general strength.
Amen.
And that's not to say that we don't do things like some sprints or some
Sure.
plyo progressions and
Right.
things like that.
And you have to,
But
right.
Exactly. The importance of just building some general relative strength is so important. And you're right. It's not sexy. It's not what sells, but it's so important.
Amen. And that's so hard. And it's like, again, I'm very fortunate and very blessed with our business, and we've done very, very well. We've established a name for ourselves, but it's like, don't get me wrong. I could go tomorrow, I could buy the 5,000 square foot warehouse, throw down a bunch of turf, turn on some rap music, get a couple of guys, fast feet, fast, and I'd probably put 200 kids in there in a month. But at the same time, I think what makes, our facility special is it's kind of a smaller environment where every minute of every hour is coached. We invest in the kids. We're actually trying to improve what it is they're doing versus just making a cash cow of knee up, toe up, and icky shuffle drills. Again, I know that
Mm-hmm.
sells, but again, I'll work twice as hard to sell the right thing to the right demographic than leverage the perception of, again, it's not necessarily that these speed and agility gurus are fundamentally bad people. They see what the consumer wants and they sell them that product. I mean, that's business 101. I just have and I think a lot of guys that are doing it the right way for the right, it's an ethics issue when, okay, it sells, but is it working? Can you prove that it works? That's the thing that I get frustrated with some of these speed and agility places is they sell speed and agility. They don't track any metrics. They don't see what's going on. They got 50 kids to one coach and they're yelling through these drills. I appreciate it from the general activity perspective. But if I'm going to sell you strength or speed, I'm going to prove every damn bit of it because I think it's important to quantify. All right, if I'm going to invest in this, I want to see the return on this. And again, working with younger kids, you get the newbie gains. So it's relatively easy to show them the progress and the results. But I don't have it in my bones just to sell somebody what doesn't work despite it being visually appealing.
We could talk kind of about this sort of stuff all
Forever.
day,
No,
I'm
yeah,
sure.
you're right.
Just yeah. For those that might want a little bit more, just dive into some X's and O's. So
Yeah.
new kids coming into your program, what does that look like? Like, what are some of the things that they're going to be doing? Is there any assessments that you do off the bat? What does that kind of
For sure.
look
Well, the
like?
first thing we do is we cut the sleeves off their shirt and get them addicted to Leonard Skinner rock music. No, but it's funny. I've been obviously down the movement screen routes and all these different assessments that we like to put kids through, and I've learned over the years we don't even do really one-on-one evaluations anymore. What we do, we call them evals on the fly. And this is kind of probably counter to a lot of what you might have heard. But again, this week, as an example, we're getting droves of new students as fall sports come to an end and the winter is kind of the lull period here in the States. And what we do is we don't do any coaching at all. And people are like, oh my gosh, that's insane. Why would you not do anything? What I'm trying to do is, first of all, break the barrier, break the ice with a new athlete who might be coming in. Everybody already knows what they're doing. I'm new. I don't know what's going on. Am I going to do it right? Am I going to do it? And we make it very, very fist bump. How was your day? What sports do you play? And we don't do any we do evaluate. I'll get to this. We don't do any coaching. And the reason is I want the kids to show me how they move naturally without me throwing a bunch of jargon at them. Now, obviously, if they're putting themselves in a position to where they could compromise or hurt themselves, we're going to obviously correct that. But sprinting, I just want Noah to run. Just run as fast as you can. Just go. And then afterwards, I'm clapping him up and I'm pumped for him. Great job. Now, hey, I'm paying a lot of attention to his gait cycle and the way that he's moving and his arms are here or there, but I'm not telling him that because the first day he's there, now what does it look like? Oh my gosh, this coach is on me. He's correcting every little thing. I must suck. I'm doing it wrong. And then at the end of the session,
Mm-hmm.
I clap him up and you kicked ass and you did everything because he did. Again, all I really care about initially is effort. And now we go to the drawing board and we see what those kids did, quote, wrong, right? Obviously and again, working with so many for so long, a lot of the issues are going to be similar because they're in that same developmental stage of life. And then once we kind of establish where the kids are at from a general movement perspective, I always tell my coaches, one cue. That's all I want. If we're going through goblet squats at his second session, we can start from the ground up, and I can tell him feet shoulder width, toes pointed slightly out, sit back, chest up, all these things that mean nothing to him. But that first session, I want to get his feet right. He's going to round his lower back a little bit because he doesn't understand the hinging of the hips. We're going to get his feet damn right. And I'm going to clap him up for like there's no tomorrow because he learned that one thing. And now he knows his feet. And then now, okay, we want to focus on our knees tracking out. The next session, hey, Steven, got our feet set. Now, again, not pushing out drastically, but again, I always say our knees want to wobble. Our knees don't want to work with. You have to speak the language, right? So they're coming in here, push those knees out. And then, well, naturally, as the knees track outwardly, the hips start to open. So it's, again, evaluating them and giving them prescriptions based on what I see. And again, I've never made them feel inferior, that we're doing something wrong, because I'm playing such a long game with them that, again, it might be more visually attractive from a sales perspective to walk around with an iPad or a clipboard and I mark how much they suck. And then I show their parents, this is where your kid's terrible. Here's how I'm going to fix it. Oh my God. I create fear that doesn't do anything. Whereas, again, if I just shut up, know what they need to do, make those micro adjustments, 90 days into our program, the kids aren't perfect, but I got a lot of this fixed without selling the narrative that they're broken. So I know that's might be a little bit of a different approach. That, again, I understand that there's systemized approaches out there and things, do work well. I've just I don't sell out to the notion that kids are wrong and kids are broken and they need to fix this. That the evaluation process, where most people, they try to get it done in 1 hour of time, when a kid is nervous as all hell to be there anyway, and he might be a little bit tight and rigid, and I tell them, give me some time and I'll see it. And that's when we slowly kind of microdose the quote fixes without, telling the kid that he sucks. So that's just been an approach that's worked for us, because, again, you get into the mental and the emotional side of performance. Kids want to feel like they fit in. They want to feel like they're accomplishing something, that they're doing something well. And sitting there and treating them like a patient in a doctor's office, it just hasn't been the approach that I've taken. And I've evolved that over the years. Again, when I first started, by the book, everything, functional movement screen, you were doing, and I was so robotic that, again, I may have not been wrong, but how does that make them feel? I have this kind of relaxed approach now that has allowed me to build trust with the athlete much more effectively. And once they trust you, now when I go to coach them, that guy's got my best interests, versus this is just some drill sergeant that's telling me everything I'm doing wrong.
My philosophy now, and like I said, like you said, sorry, I've done by the book from the start. And then as you kind of get into it, you see what works in practice and what works in theory.
Amen, brother. Amen.
I'm now really on to, like, training is the testing, basically. So I'm looking at everything that they're doing as they do it. And there's actually little check marks that we're doing.
Amen.
But it just creates such a better environment.
Oh, it's everything. And it's something that, and I appreciate you saying that, what works by the book and what works in practice. I've got every strength and conditioning book right here along this wall, and I've read them all, and the science of periodization and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, at the end of the day, I'm calling an RDL a butt back. That's the exercise that we do at the gym, because, again, hinge my hips, do this. Hey, Steve, pretend like you've got a car door behind you, and I want you to shut the car door with your butt. Well, that's easy. I just stick my butt back. So that's a butt back, versus, we're going to have soft knees and we're going to hinge the hips back, keeping a neutral spine. A neutral spine, is that the same thing as the in my dad's car, in neutral? Like they don't know what any of this means. So it's, again, putting them to where they can learn it their way, because that's what coaching is, man. I firmly believe it's teaching, and the goal is to minimize learning curves and understanding. Does a math teacher on day one expect to be able to assess math skills and then magically fix everything overnight? Or does it take multiple semesters to teach that? I've just, again, we're not going to put kids in compromised positions. We're obviously, I tell everyone, we've got to earn movement patterns and we have to earn progressions. If we can't perform a kettlebell goblet squat, the squat is one where I like to load it a little bit just to kind of give them a counterbalance to help them sit down. But I'm not going to load a barbell squat to a kid that can't perform a kettlebell goblet squat. So we're going to focus on those micro movement patterns. Again, I have them squat to a high box to where we earn that position. And then I'll lower the box a little bit, earn that position. And then before you know it, we're stacking days of doing things the right way. Whereas if you don't, these kids go from a training age of 0, like you mentioned earlier, they're thrown into a high school weight training class with sometimes a coach that might not be ultra qualified. There's 40 kids. And on day 1, they're doing a squat max to find out where they're at. And now what's happening? These kids are ingraining patterns that they've never done before in a negative way. And the mind is very smart. It's going to take the path of least resistance. And guess what the path of least resistance is in a back squat? It's a rounded back. Like that's the easiest way to get down there. So now, and we load the, so it's again, it's why I'm so passionate about getting them so young, is they're very impressionable. And if we learn to do things the right way and we take the time required to really solidify these patterns, now it's almost like they don't know how to do it wrong. And you get the egos and things where they try to put too much weight on the bar. But again, I feel like the earlier we start, the slower we can afford to go. Whereas sometimes a 17-year-old kid will come to the gym, never done I want to play college, whatever. Well, now I've got a very short window of time to try to, put training on this kid that, again, I have 12-year-olds that are more competent than my 17-year-olds because the 12-year-old, you'll appreciate this, has a training age of 4, where the 17-year-old is biologically older but has a shorter training age, so it's interesting to see, you have to factor in like the developmental stages and whatnot. But I've got some 12-year-olds, man, that'll blow your doors off with how well they can squat and run. And it's not because I'm, this crazy coach. I've just put a shit ton of practice into them.
Some kids pick it up much faster than others.
Absolutely. But they will all pick it. Yeah, exactly. And that's where, again, I refuse to prematurely advance a kid. At the end of the day, an 11-year-old is still an 11-year-old. Some 11-year-olds get it in 2 months. But guess what? If it takes him 2 years, the kid's 13. He still has 5. There's so much time that, again, we're sometimes left alluded to thinking that we got to get it all right now. And you don't have to. There's some early bloomers, but man, I really like those late bloomers who peak at the right time. We've all seen those kids that 13, 14 years old, they're the phenoms out there. And then at 18, they're working at the burger joint because they ran out of gas. I'd rather keep it slow and play the game long than try to get the instant gratification tomorrow.
Well, man, I appreciate you coming on. I'm pretty sure we could keep talking, but the last question I want to give, just as a leaving question.
Sure.
What are the top 3 exercises that, your athletes love without a doubt? It's just their favorite 3 things to do in the gym from your perspective.
No, I love it. It's a great question. And again, they wouldn't be my top 3 choices. I'll tell you that right now. So number 1, far and away, is going to be a band assisted jump. I don't know if you're familiar with Cal Dietz, where he's got the band, they just, again, it's a great exercise. They love doing, because it's fun, right? They love doing the banded jumps. So that would definitely be number 1. And that would even get into our adult population, because all of a sudden you feel like Michael Jordan for a short period of time. So the band assisted jumps would be 1. Number 2, any sort of like our med ball slam type stuff. I think a lot of times the kids, it's an expression of power, and you feel strong and capable. We do a lot of like depth drop med ball slams where I'll get them on a bench and we call them gorilla slams, and they're up here and just giving it, everything they got. So the depth drop med ball slam, and then kind of the bedrock of our program. And while it's not the be all end all exercise, we use a lot of like higher box squats, and I'm using those for, a variety of different reasons. But it's an exercise that we can very safely load up pretty good. And as much as there is physiological benefit to those box squats, it makes the kids, upstairs in their minds feel just strong as shit. You know, the amount of girls that we have that are putting 300, 400 pounds on their back. And again, it's not about the number, but you take a 115-pound female and she's got 3 plates on her back. The fact that she can stand up and hold that is absolutely insane from a relative perspective. And then she racks that bar. I don't care if she just did a static hold. Forget squatting. The way that that makes them feel is like, I'm that mother trucker, you know, like you know, it makes them feel good. So that would be probably the third one. And just as a little caveat for the ones that they hate, Bulgarian split squat, anytime I program those, I have to watch out for having a rock thrown at my face because they hate the Bulgarian split squats. And reverse lunges, you know, 2 of my favorite that have a lot of value, but no thanks on the split squats and lunges. But hey, we sometimes gotta do what we don't always want to do, right?
Yep, exactly. If they don't enjoy the training process, they're not really going to give their
Right,
all. So might as well
exactly.
give them some.
You have to. You gotta feed them. That's right.
Well, Matt, if people want to reach out to you or find you, how can they do that?
Absolutely. I'm pretty active on our Instagram page, which is at Zingler_strength. And then also on Twitter or X, I think it is now, at Ray Zingler. And I always say there was a lot of people that didn't owe me anything that helped me along the way. So if there's anybody that has any questions or DMs or anything like that, I try to get to all of those to pay respects to people along my journey who didn't owe me anything but gave me that time. So
That's awesome, man. I appreciate you coming on. It's been a good talk.
Liam, thanks so much, man. I appreciate you.